I never thought that at 66 I would completely lose my hearing, but that's exactly what happened to me 4 months ago after I contracted a very severe infection. My name is Mina, and this whole mess started the very day I woke up one morning in the hospital room and realized that I couldn't hear anything anymore. It was a strange, frightening feeling, like being suddenly thrown into outer space, where there are no sounds, no landmarks, only a dull, alien silence. Doctors and nurses were fussing around me, their lips were moving, they were saying something, but not a single sound reached me, and I had to read their faces, their expressions, in order to somehow understand what was happening. It took me a moment to realize how serious it was. It seemed that something was about to change, my hearing would return, perhaps in an hour or two, but a day passed, then another, and I was still in this closed bubble of soundlessness, isolated from the familiar world. However, perhaps no one would really notice the difference, because I had no one to talk to anyway. My daughter Lucy and I haven't spoken for many years, ever since her father, my husband, died. This story still makes me boil with anger and resentment, even now, after so many years, I can't think about it calmly. Lucy showed up at my house just a few days after the funeral and, standing in the living room among the funeral flowers that had not yet been cleaned, demanded that I sell our family home and give her half of everything her father had left. I remember just being numb at that moment, unable to believe that she could say such things, that she could be so cold, calculating. I told her then that her father had left me everything in his will, but that in the end, everything would go to her because she was my only daughter, my only child. "Why are you in such a hurry?" I asked her, still hoping that she would say something that would dispel this terrible feeling of betrayal. But she didn't like that answer. I remember how her face changed, how anger flashed in her eyes, and then she screamed, "It's not fair. I have my own family to think about. I can't just sit around and wait for you to die." Those were the last words we said to each other before she slammed the door and walked out of my life. Since then, she lived her life with her husband Mike and their children, somewhere in a rented house on the other side of town, and I was left alone in a big house that was once filled with voices, laughter, family dinners, but now has turned into a silent shadow of the past. Then the infection came and I lost my hearing. I was lying in the hospital, staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than ever, when suddenly I saw someone enter the room. It was Lucy. She was holding a notebook in her hands and, coming closer, wrote a few words, and then showed me the page. "Mom, you need someone to take care of you. Let me help you. Please." I do not know if it was the effect of medication, my general weakness, or just fatigue from loneliness, but before I had time to think properly, I nodded. And before I knew it, Lucy, her husband Mike, their 18-year-old daughter Drew, and 14-year-old Tom moved into my house. I even gave Lucy access to my bank account so she could pay all the bills and purchases, not only for me, but for their whole family. It seemed to me that it would be easier this way, because now that I could no longer hear, going to the store, talking to cashiers, and negotiating with utilities became a real challenge for me. The first few weeks of living together were strange, unusual, but, surprisingly, Lucy really kept her word. Every morning she went shopping, made sure that the house always had everything she needed, cooked breakfasts, lunches, dinners, cleaned, kept order, and didn't even complain when I had to go to the next doctor's appointment. These receptions quickly became part of our new routine. Lucy drove me to the clinic, sat next to me in those uncomfortable plastic chairs, waited patiently for her turn, and then helped me communicate with the doctors. We got into a system where everyone started writing down information for me in notebooks or on their phones, and I probably answered too loudly, but no one seemed to mind. Everything seemed almost normal as it could be in a situation like this. I was already getting used to the new roles of life, to this forced silence, when one day, at one of the doctor's appointments, something happened that changed everything. The doctor conducted all kinds of tests, and I hoped that they would finally have good news, that perhaps this was all temporary, that there was a way to fix the situation, that modern technology had long gone so far that restoring hearing to an elderly woman was not such a difficult task. But instead, he frowned, made a few notes in his folder, then slowly and methodically wrote in his notebook, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Parker, but even a hearing aid won't help in your case. We need to continue investigating the underlying cause of your deafness before we can talk about any kind of hearing restoration." I must have stared at this note for 5 whole minutes, trying to comprehend what was written, trying to force myself to read these words again and find some hidden meaning in them that would change their meaning. It felt like someone had slammed a heavy door in front of me, locking me in this silent world forever. Lucy had to pat me on the shoulder to get my attention, and when I looked up at her, I saw concern in her eyes, but with it something else, a hint of relief, as if she knew in advance what the doctor's response would be, as if she had long since come to terms with this one. I didn't know what to say. And what could you say at such a moment? Just shrug my shoulders, nod, as if nothing terrible had happened, as if I was already used to it, as if it wouldn't change anything in my life? Or should I try to argue, beg the doctor to come up with something else, offer me surgery, experimental treatments, or some technology that could give me back the ability to hear? I took a deep breath, but I still couldn't find the strength to even write an answer. At home, we got used to a new way of communicating. My family had to write down everything they wanted to say on pieces of paper, on the screen of a phone or tablet. Sometimes they just motioned for me to leave, sometimes they texted me what to cook for dinner, sometimes they tried to speak loudly and clearly so I could lip read, but we didn't always succeed. It wasn't perfect, but we managed. This whole situation has strangely brought me closer to my granddaughter Drew. One day she came into my room with a tablet in her hands, smiling broadly, and handed it to me. "Grandma," she wrote, "let me show you some cool apps. I think you'll like it." She spent hours teaching me how to use various programs, patiently showing me how to download ebooks, how to play simple games, how to turn on subtitles in movies, and even how to use online forums. I didn't expect the internet to be such an amazing place when you suddenly have an infinite amount of time. I found websites about everything imaginable, joined several online book clubs where discussions took place in written format, and even made new acquaintances, albeit through a screen. But, of course, there was something I lost. The hardest part turned out to be ahead. I had to quit my job at college. It was much more difficult for me than I expected. I taught literature there for many years, not because I needed money. Thomas left me enough money to make me feel more than comfortable, but because I enjoyed standing in front of students, discussing great works of literature with them, and watching their faces light up when they understand a difficult passage, how their eyes light up when I tell them something they didn't know before. It was what made me get out of bed in the morning. But how can you teach if you don't hear your students? How can you have discussions if you can't hear their opinions? How can you understand that a student is having difficulties if you don't hear him timidly raise his hand to ask a question? How can you continue to live the life you had before if the most important thing has disappeared from it? So now my days have changed. I spent most of my time reading books, both printed and electronic, on a tablet that Drew had given me. I found that living in silence makes me notice things that I might have missed before without even thinking about them. From my usual place in the armchair in the living room, I could watch my family's daily life for hours, even if I couldn't hear them talking. Lucy and Mike seemed to get along better than ever. I saw them standing close to each other in the kitchen every morning, laughing over cups of coffee, as Lucy touched Mike's hand, as he bent down to kiss her temple. It was a strange feeling to see them as if nothing had changed, as if they were happy, as if this new life suited them more than the old one. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite figure out. Some small details that didn't fit into the big picture. Mike often left the house in the evenings. Lucy sometimes disappeared into her room with her phone for a long time, and when I accidentally entered, she immediately hid the screen. Tom and Drew were also acting strangely. There was some kind of tension between them, some hidden anxiety that I hadn't noticed before. And then I saw how one night, when the whole house was already asleep, Lucy took my wallet and took out a bank card from it. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped onto the stairs, almost afraid of what I might hear in the house that had remained mute for so many months. Every sound, even the smallest one, seemed incredible to me, as if I had been reborn in a world filled with voices, rustles, and the breath of life. The wood creaked under my feet, and the sound was so familiar, that it stung my eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a clock was ticking, and a slight noise could be heard from the kitchen. Someone was moving dishes, perhaps brewing morning coffee. I froze halfway down, listening, absorbing every detail, trying to get used to this unexpected miracle, but at that moment I heard something that sent a chill through my body. Voices came from the kitchen, muffled, fast, tense. Lucy spoke in a whisper, but now that I could hear, it didn't seem like a whisper anymore. "We can't wait any longer, Mike, do you understand? She still doesn't suspect anything, but—" "Lucy, hush," Mike interrupted her, his voice low and hurried. "Don't you understand what waiting means? Everything is going as it should, no need to rush, just behave as usual." "How can I behave as usual when I'm afraid every minute that she'll notice something? Have you seen the way she looks at me? I feel like she's suspicious." Mike sighed heavily, and there was the sound of a chair being moved. "It's just your nerves. She doesn't know anything. She's not listening." It pierced me like an icy needle. Me. They were talking about me. I pressed my palm to my mouth, holding my breath, feeling an icy realization spreading inside me, frightening and burning at the same time. All those strange looks, tense pauses, those grins that I saw, all this was not a figment of my imagination. I wasn't going crazy, I wasn't looking for conspiracies where there weren't any. Slowly, as if my every move could give me away, I took a step back, then another. I couldn't stay here. I needed to think about it. I returned to my room, closed the door behind me, and, with trembling hands, grabbed my phone and turned on the screen. For 4 months I lived in silence, not needing it to make calls, but now that my hearing had returned, I could use it for its intended purpose. However, before I could do anything, the door to my bedroom opened. "Mom?" Lucy was standing in the doorway, her eyes slightly narrowed, as if she was trying to figure out what I was doing. "Are you awake yet?" I froze, hiding the phone behind my back, and forced myself to smile. "Yes," I said, deliberately keeping my voice level. "Something woke me up." Lucy bit her lip, her gaze darted towards the window for a second, as if she had just realized that the sound of the car might have woken me up. "It was just a delivery," she said quickly. "I ordered some groceries. Are you okay?" I nodded, pretending to yawn, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if I hadn't heard their conversation in the kitchen, as if I was still the same helpless, deaf woman they thought I was. "Sure, it's just early in the morning," I muttered. "I'm going to wash up." Lucy paused for a second, studying my face intently, but then nodded. "Good. Breakfast will be served in half an hour." When she was gone, I exhaled slowly. I knew I had to do something. I didn't know what exactly they were up to, but now I knew for sure that it concerned me. And if I don't find out the truth first, if I don't figure out what's going on, then it's quite possible that they'll deal with me in such a way that I won't have a second chance. I couldn't wait to tell everyone about my miracle, that my hearing had returned, that I could hear this world in its entirety again, but halfway down the stairs, I froze when I heard voices from the living room. Lucy and Mike were already awake and talking in low but strained voices, and maybe a few days ago I would have walked by without paying attention, believing they were just discussing their business, but now that I could hear, every word they said cut into me like a sharp blade. "I'm so damn tired of this," Mike said through gritted teeth, and anger, annoyance, and fatigue from some imposed necessity could be clearly heard in his voice. "How much more do we have to pretend that we care about your mother, act like we're one big happy family? I'm tired of tiptoeing around this old woman. When is she finally going to die?" I froze, My hand convulsively gripped the railing of the stairs, and I felt an icy wave cover my head. But what happened next turned out to be even worse. "Just be patient," Lucy replied, and I heard a slight grin in her voice, as if this conversation wasn't something frightening, as if they weren't discussing my death, but something insignificant, everyday, not worth much attention. "It won't be long. I mean, look at her. She has already lost her hearing, and this is usually the first sign of a general decline in strength in the elderly. Once they start to lose their abilities, they usually give up pretty quickly. She'll probably just wither away." The world tilted, my legs felt like cotton wool, and I slowly, as if in a daze, sank down onto the step of the stairs so as not to fall. My own daughter. My flesh and blood. She was sitting here, just a few meters away from me, discussing my imminent demise with her husband, as if it were a planned, expected fact that did not cause her any emotions, except perhaps a slight impatience. All those suspicious looks that I'd noticed before, all those strange grins, the whispers that suddenly stopped when I appeared, all those feelings that I attributed to my paranoia and inner fear, it all turned out to be true. It took all my strength not to burst into tears right there, not to give myself away, not to scream that I could hear them, that I knew what they were talking about. I got up, slowly, without haste, straightened my robe and went downstairs, making sure that my steps were heavy, so that they should sound like the steps of a person who does not hear and does not care how loud he moves. "Good morning," I practically shouted in the same voice I'd been using for the last 4 months, a voice they were already used to, a voice I knew wouldn't arouse their suspicions. They jumped in their seats, but quickly recovered. Lucy gave me her sweet, disgustingly fake smile, which I now knew all too well, and Mike nodded enthusiastically. God, how did I not notice this hypocrisy before? In the afternoon, when I was alone, I pulled my old phone out of the drawer and thought about how to use it as a voice recorder. I didn't know yet exactly what I was going to do with the notes, but I needed proof. Every morning after that, I put my phone in the pocket of my house dress and let it record everything I heard. And the more I listened, the more sick I got. It wasn't just Lucy and Mike. Even Tom, my grandson, was involved. One day he came home from school, dropped his backpack at the door, looked directly at me sitting in my chair, and asked loudly, deliberately slowly, "Hey, is the deaf old lady still alive?" Both Lucy and Mike burst out laughing as if it was the funniest joke they had ever heard. "Yes, son," Mike said, chuckling. "Unfortunately, she's still kicking." "God, she's so annoying," Tom complained, rolling his eyes. "Everything should be recorded or indicated by gestures. It's infuriating. Couldn't she just figure it out on her own?" And despite all this, despite every vile word, every spit of poison, every mockery, when they addressed me, their faces remained kind, loving, caring. They wrote me notes with polite questions. "Mom, do you need anything? Mom, are you comfortable? Mom, do you want a cup of tea?" And all this time, they were just waiting for me to die. God, if it wasn't for Drew. In the midst of this ugliness, my granddaughter remained the only light, the only sincere and pure soul in this house. I heard it in her voice, saw it in her actions, felt it in her concern for me. And now I knew that the only person I could trust was her. Every few days, Drew would knock on my door, appearing on my doorstep with a new book under her arm, and even if I was sitting in an armchair pretending to be immersed in reading or gazing thoughtfully out the window, I was always happy to look up when I saw her radiant, open face, full of sincere enthusiasm. "Grandma," she wrote in her notebook, carefully turning it towards me so I could read it. "I saw this in a bookstore and thought of you. It's about a woman who traveled through Europe in the 1920s. I know you like historical stories." She was right, I really loved them. I greedily devoured pages full of memories of distant places and times, of people who lived differently, dreamed differently, but, in essence, remained the same as we were. And I liked how Drew paid attention to what I really liked, unlike her mother. who just pretended that she cared. Drew could sit with me for hours, showing me her photos on her laptop, telling me about her new project, in which she tried to capture people's stories through random street shots, an old man reading a newspaper at a bus stop, a girl mesmerized by a toy display, a couple sitting in a park in complete silence, but holding each other. They held each other's hands as if the whole world no longer existed for them. She had a real talent for seeing things that eluded others, capturing moments that told a whole story in one shot. I could hear her voice now as she shared these things with me, full of passion, enthusiasm, and a sincere desire to understand this world through her camera lens. But I continued to pretend, reading her notes and answering too loudly, as I had become accustomed to over the past few months. It broke my heart to pretend with her, the only honest person in this house. But I couldn't risk others finding out. But what really touched me to the core was the way she stood up for me when she thought I couldn't hear her. One evening, when I was in my room, I heard voices from the hallway outside the door. "Mom, you need to stop talking about Grandma like that." Drew's voice was firm, restrained, but there was indignation in it. "She deserves better. She's not just some kind of burden that we're waiting to get rid of." "Oh, honey, mind your own business." Lucy waved her hand. "Go to your room and stop meddling in things that don't concern you." I heard Drew's heavy footsteps, the door of her room slamming, and then, a little later, I saw her through the window. She was sitting on a garden bench, squeezing her shoulders, wiping away tears. I really wanted to tell her how proud I was of her, how grateful I was for her protection, but instead I could only watch from the window as a lump of pain grew in my chest. It's strange how Drew turned out to be so different from her mother. Where Lucy was calculating and cold, Drew was warm and sincere. Where Lucy saw me as a burden to be endured, Drew saw me as a person to be cherished. Sometimes I found myself studying her face, trying to find traces of the young woman Lucy had once been, before money and greed poisoned her heart. Having Drew in my corner made the whole situation a little more bearable. Yes, I lived in a house full of people who were waiting for my death, but at least I had one ally, one person who saw me as more than just an inconvenience or a source of inheritance, one person who cared. It's amazing how people can say anything in the presence of someone who is considered deaf. I was sitting in my usual spot in the living room, pretending to be engrossed in a book, when I overheard Lucy and Mike talking. They didn't even try to lower their voices because they thought I couldn't hear anything anyway. "So how much did you manage to pull out?" Mike asked casually, as if it was some small matter that didn't deserve much attention. He sprawled on the couch, putting his feet up on my coffee table, as if this place belonged to him. Lucy was flipping through some papers, probably my bank statements. $25,000 at the moment," she replied. I almost dropped the book, but caught myself in time, clutching it tighter in my hands. $25,000. They stole $25,000 from me. Mike chuckled. "Come on, Lucy, you need to be more aggressive about this. This old bag has more money than she knows what to do with. She won't even notice if you take twice as much." I heard Lucy giggle. "I just don't want it to look suspicious. She's old, but she's not completely stupid." "Stupid," Mike snorted. "She sits here day after day, reads her books, plays her online clubs. She won't suspect anything until you start leaving crumbs on her account." I was shaking. Not only from anger, not only from betrayal, but also from the realization of how far they had come, how confident they felt in their impunity. I knew I had to do something. I knew I couldn't just wait any longer. I kept my eyes on my book, slowly turning the pages, watching every movement of my hands, watching my fingers slide over the paper, keeping my breathing steady, playing my part as if I hadn't heard anything, as if I didn't understand anything, as if their words weren't stabbing into me with sharp blades. Inside, my heart was beating so hard that it seemed they could hear it, could feel the blood pounding in my temples from a frenzied mixture of anger, disgust, and fear. "It's not that easy," Lucy said irritably, and I heard her drop a piece of paper on the table, Probably another statement from my bank account. Mom has notifications about large withdrawals and transfers. If we exceed certain amounts, she will receive notifications. She may be deaf, but unfortunately, she is not blind. We need to be careful. Mike sighed heavily, and there was a lazy displeasure in his voice, like a man who is too lazy to make an effort, but who has to do it. It's a pity she's not blind either, he muttered. It would simplify everything. I had to fight the shudder that ran through my body. I had to grip the book so tightly that my fingers turned white. I had to bite the inside of my cheek so as not to give myself away. They were sitting there, right in front of me, discussing how convenient it would be if I not only didn't hear, but also didn't see, as if I were not a living person, but an old, unnecessary object that you can just ignore until it crumbles to dust on its own. I wondered if there was a limit to their cruelty. Later that day, I was pretending to doze off in my chair near the kitchen when I heard them talking again. The dictaphone in the pocket of my house dress caught every word, every intonation, every mocking smirk that they did not consider necessary to hide. I noticed you're buying these gorgeous organic steaks, Mike said with a slight grin. And this expensive wine, isn't it too fancy for your mother? Lucy laughed, that high-pitched, fake laugh of hers that she used when she wanted to charm someone. Oh, please, she said with mock disdain. I buy the best things for us, and I get her the cheapest things I can find. Generic brands, discounted meat, anything on sale. She doesn't feel the difference anyway. She's so grateful that someone cooks for her. They both turned to me, and I felt their eyes on me, but I didn't move, just breathed evenly, as if I were deeply asleep. And then they started laughing. Not even trying to hold back. After all, why stay silent around a deaf woman at all? Look at her, Lucy giggled. Sleeping like a baby, having no idea we're eating filet mignon while she gets a discounted burger. At least she gets something to eat, Mike chuckled too. Better than she deserves. I continued to breathe evenly, continued to keep my face relaxed, but my stomach twisted in disgust. The worst part wasn't even the money, the cheap food, the theft, or the cheating. The worst part was hearing the absolute glee in their voices when they discussed how they were using me. They didn't just steal from me out of desperation or need. They enjoyed it. They laughed. They had fun making a fool of me, a deaf old lady. They had fun at my expense. 3 weeks before my birthday, Lucy handed me a note at breakfast. Her handwriting was unusually neat, even, as if she hadn't written it hastily, but had carefully traced each letter. Mom, I want to throw you a big birthday party. We will invite all your friends and relatives. You deserve to be celebrated. I smiled and nodded enthusiastically, shouting in my usual loud voice. That sounds wonderful, honey. How thoughtful of you. But now I knew better. It wasn't a concern. It wasn't a desire to arrange a holiday for me. It was a performance. Lucy wanted witnesses. Maybe she was trying to establish herself in the eyes of society as a devoted daughter who selflessly cares for her helpless mother. Or maybe she wanted to show me what a burden I was, and how nobly she handled it. I smiled, nodded, and pretended to be happy, but everything inside me was boiling. Now I knew the truth. And now I have a plan. The preparations were in full swing, and I was watching, not letting on that I knew the ins and outs of this carefully planned show-off. Lucy spent hours on the phone, making dozens of calls, inviting relatives, friends, neighbors, anyone she could remember, organizing a party that was supposed to be the culmination of her long performance. I heard everything, how she put on a sweet, caring tone, talking about how difficult it is to take care of an elderly mother, but how happy she is to do it, because family is the most important thing in life. She ordered expensive catering, hired decorators, and even arranged with a professional photographer, because, of course, such a day needs to be captured in the best traditions of family happiness. Nothing but the best for her dear old mom's birthday. When the day of the party came, the house was filled with people, relatives whom I hadn't seen in years, old friends with whom I once shared joyful and sad moments. Some of them looked awkward, not knowing how to talk to me, wrote me notes, tried to smile, and I responded in kind, with my usual warm smile, which hid endless contempt for the whole theatrical production. Lucy fluttered among the guests like an ideal hostess, like a devoted, loving daughter, constantly repeating what an inspiration her mother was, how she had the privilege to take care of me, how, despite all the difficulties, she does it with joy, because family is sacred. After all she's done for me, it's the least I can do, she said in her voice, filled with fake hoarseness from supposedly pent-up emotions, and the guests nodded, looking at her with respect and sympathy. I sat in my place of honor, smiling and nodding, as befits a grateful, deaf mother, and inside I counted down the minutes until the moment when this farce would come to an end. And then Tom dimmed the lights, and a slideshow appeared on the wall. Photo after photo filled the screen, expertly selected, perfectly arranged frames that were supposed to capture a happy family, care, love, and support. Here's Lucy helping me in the garden. Here's Mike sitting next to me like he's reading to me, which, of course, he's never done. Here's Tom and Drew on the porch, laughing next to me like they're spending all their time with me. Each photo was staged, each portraying the lie that Lucy wanted everyone to believe. Sentimental captions shone on top of the pictures: "Love knows no bounds, family forever," and I could hear the muffled sobs of some of the guests. I could hear my cousin Patricia wiping away tears and saying how wonderful it was to see such devotion, as my old college friend Martha stroked Lucy's hand and repeated what a wonderful daughter she was. And then the last photo, our whole, friendly family, smiling at the camera, and under it a sparkling inscription: "We love you, Grandma." And that's when I decided I'd had enough. I got up slowly, let the guests turn around, let their gazes linger on me, waiting for some kind of thank you speech. The room went silent, and I saw Lucy freeze, her face slowly paling, as if she intuitively sensed that something had gone wrong. Mike tensed up like an animal sensing danger, and Tom didn't even have time to take his hand off the laptop from which he was launching the presentation. I looked at everyone, paused, and then said calmly, in an even voice, without the usual loud shouts, without exaggerated articulation, without exaggerated gestures, as if washing off the role they had so carefully imposed on me. "I have something important to tell you." The silence that followed was deafening. Lucy froze, her lips slightly parted, as if she was trying to say something, but couldn't get a word out. Mike looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Tom just froze, eyes wide open, unable to move. I didn't give them a second to recover. Slowly, watching their faces with pleasure, I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. "I have proof of everything I said," I announced, and before anyone could object, I pressed the play button. And suddenly, Lucy's voice cut through the silence in the room, clear, cold, without a shadow of care and love. "It won't be long. The old lady will give up soon." Mike's whisper, full of self-satisfaction. Lucy. Matter-of-factly, 25,000. Mike, with a grin. "It's nothing. Take more." And then Tom's voice, full of malicious mockery. "Hey, is the deaf old lady still alive?" The recordings continued, one after the other, filling the room with every disgusting comment, every vile remark, every cruel joke, every conversation about how they stole my money, discussed my death, laughed behind my back, confident that I would never find out. Some of my friends covered their mouths with their hands in horror, others just looked at Lucy and her family with an expression of pure disgust. I was standing in the middle of this scene, no longer a victim, no longer helpless, no longer someone they could use. I was the one who was in control of the situation now. I turned to my cousin Robert, who had worked as a lawyer for more than 30 years and had seen a lot of human meanness in his long practice, but even he seemed shocked by what he had heard. His face darkened, his jaw clenched, and his hands, resting on the arms of the chair, slowly clenched into fists, as if he was barely restraining himself from saying everything he thought about Lucy and Mike, right now, in front of everyone. Robert, I said clearly and calmly. My voice did not tremble, did not rise, but there was not a drop of that softness in it that they used to see in me. I want to use your services. I'm going to press charges against my daughter and her husband for elder abuse and financial fraud. Robert immediately stood up, his heavy frame looming over the table, and he looked at me with such determination that I realized that if he could, he would personally throw Lucy and her family out of my house without trial. I'd be happy to do that, Mina. His voice was as hard as steel. And you can be sure I'll do it for free. What they did was despicable and vile. Lucy abruptly jumped up from her seat, her face contorted with horror, her lips trembled, her eyes filled with tears. If I hadn't known her so well, I might even have believed in the sincerity of this panic, but now I saw through it. Mom, please. Her voice broke, and she took a step toward me, as if hoping she could change my mind. You're taking everything out of context. It's just a joke. We didn't want to. We never thought. I raised my hand, and she immediately fell silent, realizing that she no longer had any power over me. Get out of my house. My voice was quiet but unyielding. There was no anger in it, no hysteria, just icy calm. That's it. Take your things and leave. They left that night. Lucy was still crying, mumbling incoherently, but I wasn't listening anymore. Mike was silent, but I could see from his tense jaw and clenched fists that he was seething with anger. However, not daring to utter a word, he knew perfectly well that he had lost. Tom, despite his cheeky rudeness in the past days, was now hiding behind his parents' backs, not even daring to look me in the eye, because now he could no longer laugh at me with impunity. Only Drew remained. She didn't leave with them, didn't ask me to change my mind, didn't try to justify her parents. She just came over and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were warm, firm, supportive, and I saw so much pride and understanding in her eyes that it suddenly became easier for me to breathe. A week later, Lucy transferred back all the stolen money. $25,000, every cent. I had no doubt that this was directly due to Robert, who, being an experienced lawyer, clearly convinced her that a lawsuit could cost her much more. But I decided not to sue. Not because I've forgiven them, but because I didn't want them to remain a part of my life, even in the form of litigation. A lawsuit would mean months, and possibly years, of proceedings, meetings, court hearings, unnecessary scandals, and dirt that I did not want to plunge into. Instead, I just went to my lawyer and made the last changes to the will. Lucy was completely crossed out. Officially. I made sure that all her relatives and friends knew about it, because I wasn't going to let her even hope for an inheritance anymore. I wasn't going to let her ever get anything from me again. And no one blamed me. They've all heard the recordings. They all knew the truth. As for Tom, some people tried to convince me that he was just a teenager, that I should be lenient with him, that at the age of 14 a person still doesn't fully understand what he's saying, that he's joking stupidly because he doesn't realize the consequences. But I didn't agree. 14 years is not infancy. 14 years is the age at which a person is already fully aware of the difference between good and evil. 14 years is enough to understand that wishing your own grandmother dead is not a joke. What he said about me was worse than what came out of his parents' mouths. But luckily, I still have Drew. My bright, sincere Drew, my saving grace. She went to Berkeley, and I fully paid for her education, because I wanted her to be free from her toxic parents, from their lies, greed, cruelty. She moved into a dorm, away from them, and now she comes to see me every weekend. We can talk for hours about her photo projects, her classes, and her dreams. Yesterday, I completed the drafting of a new will. Everything that belongs to me, my house, my savings, my paintings, my books, even my old garden, which I loved so much and where I once dreamed of spending my old age surrounded by my family, all this will go to Drew when I'm gone. Because she's the only one who's shown me true love. The only one who protected me, even when she thought I couldn't hear her. The only one who deserves it. You know, it's funny. Lucy spent years scheming, manipulating, and trying to get my money, confident that she could trick me into getting everything that didn't belong to her. And all she had to do was be a decent person. If she had shown me at least some of the sincere love that Drew showed, she would have inherited everything anyway. But it doesn't matter anymore. I may have lost my daughter, but I've gained something much more valuable. I have acquired the truth. I bought Drew. And, perhaps, for the first time in many years, I really felt happy.